Susan Flanagan, thanks for joining me today. We're here talking private mortgages. You are private money for mortgages and an expert in that space. So thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
We're in this weird kind of lending environment, aren't we? Mortgage rates are low, qualifications can be challenging, investors are trying to do more than any single deal, and private money is a common conversation, and I know many investors are using it. But let's start to give it some context because many investors also have a story around private money, is that it's too expensive to use. And I think that's the perfect place to start this conversation because times are changing, things are evolving, and to get deals done, sometimes you need to go into that private money market. So tell me a little bit about that.
Okay, yeah, that's it's interesting because it is becoming more mainstream now for
Mhm.
people to go to private money. It used to almost be a dirty word. Oh my gosh, if you had to use private money, there was something wrong. Well,
Mhm.
as a real estate investor, I think many people have realized why, first off, am I using my own funds when I can be using that quote other people's money?
Mhm.
And so they recognize that they can do more deals if they have more things happening, but also the fact that because the mortgage rules have gotten really tough, it's easier to get private money. So
Mhm.
if it costs you more, you just have to know your numbers, understand the process, and really scrutinize your deal to go, is it worth it? Can I do it?
Well, let's talk about that a little bit because, when we look at just how much money has flooded the market, we see that interest rates are quite low on the bank side of things. Back to kind of the negative connotation around private money. I mean, it wasn't that many years ago or that far back that, 10% money was a good deal and 12 and 14% was often very common. Where are we at in the rate kind of space when you're looking at private lending?
It has come down. I would say it's come down, but I think people also have to realize it's just like when you go to the store and they've got those lost leaders, idea of a sale to get you in the door.
Sure.
The same happens with this. And
Mhm.
what frustrates me is I see people go, "Well, I can get a first mortgage at 5% or 6.99," and I'm like, okay, yes, but are you getting what fees are you paying? And when you say fees, I mean, most private mortgages, you end up paying a lender fee.
Mhm.
But there are times that people add on an administrative fee, a compliance fee.
Mhm.
I don't know what they want to call it, a vacation fee for all I like, you know what I'm saying? Like it just
Sure.
can keep going. So you
Mhm.
have to really dig deep when you're asking the question. So when people call me, my answer is the same with everyone until I can see their entire file. And it
Mhm.
is generally speaking, on a first mortgage, be prepared, run your numbers between 7 and 10%. And so I
But
say
that's
then do it all at 10.
but
Figure it
that's
out at
still
10.
yeah, that's still a great deal relative to what it was before. And if there isn't any, like you say, it's always that hook, right? It's that
Yeah.
it's a low rate. I mean, the major banks do it all the time. It's like, oh, 0.99%. Oh, like if that isn't conditional. So
Yeah.
sophisticated investors realize that if it's too good to be true, it generally is, and that certainly is the case when it comes to mortgage rates. Now, when we
Yeah.
look at private financing, we've had conversations in the past, Susan, and just kind of walk us through why we would want private financing. We know that it's a good kind of bridge between, in the case of a renovation, but, talk a little bit more about that, or where else would we consider private money before we head to the big banks?
Okay. Well, I guess too, we can switch it the other ways. Um, when somebody truly can't get for the need they're looking for at the big bank, they know to
Mhm.
call for private. So that's how
Right.
we know that. But then there's other times that I have numerous investors that call me, even though they could qualify at a bank, they're
Mhm.
using private money strategically to get in the deal quickly because you
Mhm.
can fund these a lot faster. Um, Less headaches. They don't have to do as much work at their end with their
Mhm.
paperwork. Like we still need certain paperwork, but
Of
not to the
course.
degree.
Yeah.
But also you hit on it, mainly things like flips, doing where you're, buying, renovating, and then refinancing.
Mhm.
Um, the cost means nothing if you're still going to make a lot of money.
Well, there's a couple other options there. A cost aside, I think too is that, for example, if a deal gets delayed, if a bank, given how busy the banks have been, you put conditions, the deal's right, that you're going to make financing or you're going to get financing, but for some reason that gets delayed and you need a short-term bridge in terms of financing, private money will get you
Yeah.
through that period of time. That's definitely an effective use of that money.
And
Uh,
that's a common one these days.
it is,
I
isn't
should
it?
have said it is. It is. Unfortunately, yeah, people, and I mean, and it's nobody's, I shouldn't say it's nobody's fault, but it's definitely not the consumer's fault. They've done everything they should. They did it right, but then it sits on the desk at the bank for whatever reason far too long, and now it's near the end and they want to get it funded. So yeah, so
Yeah.
it does happen, unfortunately.
Well, and I like the concept that you describe, which is to use it strategically. So in other words, why go to a main bank, necessarily if main banks, people need to, for those, that are listening to this that are maybe not as experienced in that burr slash fix and flip world. The banks don't really like short-term money.
Not at all.
They prefer long-term money. So if you're buying a property undervalued and you're going to put money into it to bring it up to get some bigger and longer term financing, that's a perfect use of private capital over 6 months, 8 months, even a year, whatever it might be. Is that a fair statement, or is that a fair description of where it
It,
would work?
it definitely is. And I'll tell you what has happened as well, because everybody wants to get money as cheap as they can. I
Sure.
hear it. I know I do too. However, you got to be careful what bridges you burn. And I do know, I'm thinking of one just recently that this woman definitely, she was more interested in getting the lower rate than she was in what mess she's probably causing. So
Yeah.
I had already set up and told her exactly how I could help her. And in the end, she went to a bank and got a bank and said, well, thanks very much. I said, okay, just so you know,
Don't come
please
back.
be careful. Well, no. I mean, I'll let her come back. I have no
Sure,
problem
but
with
I
that.
think I think, Susan, that you make a really valid point. Listen, when it comes to RAIN and the community and what we teach and what we train, relationships are critical. And understanding that, if you're shopping somebody for a 1/4% or even a 0.5% rate, that takes time and energy and a lot of effort for you to actually bring this all forward, because you put a lot of wheels in motion. I mean, if somebody gets you into motion, you're bringing in you're bringing the money partners to the table. You're having conversations. You're presenting the deal. You're making sure that the deal's aligned with the right partner. I mean, and then for anybody to pull the chute last minute is unprofessional, and it just is not okay. And I have
And that,
no
yeah,
problem saying that. And
yeah.
that's where the burning of bridges happens. And this
No, but
is
I mean, what I was going to add to that, though, it wasn't even my bridge that I was concerned she was
ah
burning,
right,
because you're right there, and I can turn my head first time,
sure,
but when I see somebody's totally doing this, I was like, no, you're right. I
yeah.
don't play games with me. But it's
There
the
are
burning
there
the
are rookie
bridge.
mistakes, and the thing about that, there are rookie mistakes, but that would be one of them.
Yeah,
You know?
and in her case, I believe it's a mistake she's making, and so I
Yeah.
just forewarned her that she was doing. I said, look, I understand you want the better rate, but just so you know, you are truly doing a flip, and you're planning to continue to do flips, and you're going to burn your bridge with that bank,
Mhm.
because do you not think they have a memory? They see what you've done. A mortgage started, and within 6 months it was already discharged.
Got it.
So that was where I was, going with that. But to your point, yeah, trust me, I get irritated when people do that, but it's a give and take what we do to help people.
Of course. Now, tell me something, is that, the qualifying process is different than the big banks. And I mean, ultimately, you're going to, if you're using short-term money, it doesn't mean that you're not going to a big bank at some point and having to step up and show up with all of the paperwork that they demand. But what's the difference in the qualification process for private, for private funds versus the big banks?
Well, generally speaking, and I say this all the time to be that the lender is looking at three things: the story, the property, the exit strategy. So now that we've got all that organized, the paperwork I need is to back up what we're saying. So I need to see that that you can support the payments. So let's say you're doing it out of rent payments. Well, then we need to see that. Or I need to see 3 months maybe worth of bank statements. Or if somebody also has a full-time job, I'll say, you know what, give me documentation on that. That'll make the lender happy. So it's just supporting that. So it's that. We also need to show that you have the money for the down payment and that you have the money for the rentals. But and I know you've heard me talk about this before, we have different lending programs that are advantageous to help in those areas, that you can come in with less money than you need and less documentation. But I clearly show all this up front to each person that comes to me, and I make a list. This is what I need, send it to me. But it's not things like your employment letter and your firstborn and all of this stuff. It's and I still need to pull a credit bureau, even if that's not going to be in your favor. And a lot of times it isn't, in the sense that people might be over leveraged or they've had a situation. Explain it to me so the lender knows, because they're not basing their decision so much on you at all. It's on the property mainly.
Right. So you're also, let's give a little bit of background here. Not, for example, let's say I say to you, Susan, I want to be a lender. I have some capital that I want to lend. That doesn't mean that you're going to line me up with every deal. Give us a little bit layer back of how you match the lender to the potential borrower and some considerations in that space.
Okay, no, that's a good question. It's almost like I have pockets of lenders. So if it's a bigger mortgage, let's say $1 million or higher, I definitely have a group that I go to for that have deeper pockets to be able to fund them, versus smaller ones. Then there's people that are using their own personal funds of cash versus registered funds. So I have to keep that in mind, because registered funds, they can be, not that they're more complicated, but there can be hiccups. And if this is a time-sensitive mortgage, I don't want to see that hiccup happen for the person. So I might not go to those lenders at that point. The other big thing that I've learned as I've been growing too in my brokerage is, as much as I'd love to help everybody that has a bit of extra cash to lend out, I've had to up the amounts you can come on board with, because I don't want to put groups of people in one mortgage. It's too complicated. It's too costly for the borrower. Because it involves more on our part at the brokerage plus the lawyer. It's not as easy to do. So so I'm playing a whole game in the background of trying to match people. So when people, to your point, sorry, I feel like I went down a rabbit hole here.
That's all good.
When somebody does want to come on board as a lender, at this moment in time, we've kind of put the brakes on for a short period, but we've said you have to come on board with at least 300,000, and that amount might even have to go up higher as time goes on. It's just the nature of the kind of mortgages we're seeing.
But well, I mean, that totally makes sense given where we see prices going in terms of housing and what is it going to take to buy that property and renovate it and up the game. But let's just go beyond that even a little bit more, because this is a common conversation. This is on topic, off topic, I think. But ultimately, Susan, when we talk about the availability of capital, because people are saying to us all of the time, I need joint venture capital. But I think, to me, this is, private lending aside, you're in it. We know that there's a ton of capital in the market, more than anybody could ever, know what to do with. it's a case of tapping into it. Now, in the case
Yeah.
of private lending, you tap into it that way. But people who are saying, I can't find money, are really just telling themselves a story, because there's more capital in the game today than there ever has been before. Do you see that as well? Do you see it that way, being in the position you're in?
Absolutely. And I mean, but it's also a process too for people, I recognize, for them to get out of their comfort zone, to
Hmm.
know how to ask the right questions to people, like to
Right.
be to not be afraid to mention, if they're looking for neighbors or friends or relatives or whatever.
Sure.
But that's where, and I always say to people, call me last. I'm not offended by that. You really need to exhaust your other avenues first, because you're going to pay more through a brokerage, because we
Yeah.
have to get paid. So
Okay,
it,
so
yeah,
well, to that
sorry.
point, let's talk a little bit about the fees, because I know that's one of the things that everybody seems to be so surprised about. So yes, there is a mortgage fee. So like there's a couple of fees. First off, there's an interest rate. So that interest
Yes.
rate is going to be somewhere, let's say, between 7 and 11 or 12% these days. Let's just use that broad range.
Okay.
But on top of that, you're also going to have to pay a fee. There's a couple of fees involved. Why don't you describe those fees so people don't get all, well, I wasn't expecting that. So
Yeah.
give us a
Well,
little
and
bit.
that's the other thing. When I do hear that, I think, who did you borrow through? Because if you borrowed through a brokerage, you had to have been given a borrower disclosure
Mhm.
before you carry on with that mortgage that clearly outlines every fee. Okay.
Sure.
So if you were surprised, you didn't read your paperwork, but I will,
Yeah.
yeah,
Note to self.
I will explain from my end though, like I
Yeah,
say. So
sure.
let's say the interest rate was 10%.
Yep.
Okay. Okay. And then let's say the lender they want a 1% fee.
Yep.
So now let's say it's a $500,000 mortgage. Okay. So
Hmm.
10% on 500,000, they're going to get a 1% on 500,000.
Hmm.
Okay. My fee is usually 1% as a
Yep.
for the brokerage.
Hmm.
But the minimum that I would ever take is 2,800. So if
Hmm.
you figure that backward, let's say someone truly only need a $200,000 mortgage, they're
Right.
going to pay 2,800 from our
Yeah.
end. Okay,
Yeah.
so that's those, very transparent. There, we don't have any other fees of administrative fee or commission fee. Like there's nothing else. Those are the
Yeah.
two fees. Then the borrower must also pay for the lender's lawyer.
Hmm.
And so depending, and that's why, again, in the disclosure, we have to show the amounts, and I can't give the exact on a lawyer. So we say
Hmm.
approximate. Now, if it involved a corporation,
Hmm.
and there was more details needed
Sure.
on research, and that price might be up, so be higher. So I would say maybe 2,000.
Hmm.
But if it's just a very basic, straightforward, it'd be around 1,500 or maybe even less.
Yeah.
So we put that in there as well.
So we're looking at it, let's just use the $500,000 mortgage. So the interest rate aside, you're paying a 1% fee to you, 1% fee to the lender. So you're looking at 5 grand and 5 grand. And then you've got a legal fee on top of that. So your legal fees are going to range, but let's just say, 2 grand on either side of the equation, or
Yep,
somewhere in that area. Is that a fair statement?
that's very fair. So there's 14.
Yeah.
And the one last thing I didn't say is that the borrower also pays for the appraisal.
Okay,
If,
perfect.
yeah, and now there are times that an appraisal, we can get around an appraisal,
Yeah.
and that's very lender specific.
Yeah.
Okay, but people need to assume that there's going to be an appraisal so that they can do it. And what I do, I have a quick little guideline that I put together, because you're right, this question comes at me all the time. I put it together, and when people get a hold of me, I say, I'll just send you my guideline. Keep
Yeah.
it in your files so that when you're doing a mortgage, whether it's the first or second, and you're thinking about private money, you can refer back to it.
Right.
And yeah.
Okay, so here's the broad takeaway. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're listening to this, and as soon as we start talking about the fees and the cost, and you just kind of like stiffen up, just
Mhm.
know that it's always just about the math. Susan's made it very
Yeah.
clear. It is an expensive way to go, but it's also often the strategic way to go, and it's just math. There are certainly many, many RAIN members and investors overall who they don't even give private money a second they don't even
They
question it.
don't.
They just go to it. It's like an automatic, because when they're looking at the deals, they've worked it all in. It's just math. They look at the ROI, and that's all it is. In all of that as well is, why do you want to fight the bank? In other words, why do you want to force the river when you can go in, have less resistance, get that property up to speed so that the A lenders want to take it on, and just smooth out the whole process. So there
Yeah.
is a lot of common sense, there is a lot of business sense, and there is a lot of math sense to using private money, Susan, and always appreciate the insights that you share. Now, before we sign off on this, you've just built a brand new website. You continue to up your game. Why don't you give us a little bit of direction where we would send our viewers and listeners to?
Okay. Private Money for Mortgages with the number 4
Yeah,
is the name of my brokerage and also the name of my website.
yeah,
I'm very happy to say that I just had it redone by Remy 360.
beautiful.
So a shout out to Remy 360 for that. And on the website, I do have that you can sign up to get a complete guide to private mortgages. So I suggest to people, please come visit my website. I'd love to hear your thoughts and so forth, but download the guide. It's helpful. And
Great.
it might open the door to even more questions. And I am totally open always to questions, whether it be on the phone, all of that, all the details are on the website, how to get a hold of me.
Susan, your track record precedes you. You've been part of the RAIN community a long time. You've been an investor a very long time. You get it. You understand it. You know what both rookies and veterans alike are going through in their process, because you yourself understand it. So thank you first and foremost for being a trusted partner and being part of the RAIN community, and for sharing your insights today. Appreciate it as always, Susan. Thanks very much.